but I highly, highly, and heavily prioritize the recent success because the numbers show to me that I'm going to get more teams right by doing it this way than by trying to adjust every team, some of which will be right and some of which will be wrong. My colleagues like Bill are definitely using as many transition factors as they can factor in. And that's another reason why I think the F+ ratings are probably going to see some differences get smoothed out. My numbers are going to be higher on some teams because of that not including those transition factors and others.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Hello, and welcome to another 3 Mile Pod. Cole Manbeck here as the only 3 Mile host today, but I'm not flying solo as I'm joined by Brian Fremeau, someone who I think many college football fans who are into modern analytics and numbers in football consider to be one of the original greats, or GOATs as many people call it, one of the greats here when it comes to that, and you've heard me cite Brian's numbers frequently over the years on 3 Mile, from points per drive to his FEI and F+ ratings of college football teams to so much more. You can find Brian's work at bcftoys.com. And the best part is, not only is it a tremendous data source, but it's free and easily accessible for anyone who wants to check it out. Having Brian on the pod calls for a toast, as always, from our friends at Holiday Distillery. We are so close to K-State season kicking off, and you'll want to have a bottle of Holiday Distillery's Ben Holiday Bottled in Bond Bourbon at your tailgate each and every Saturday this fall. Trust me, you're going to be very popular amongst your bourbon friends if you do so. Go pick up a bottle of Ben Holiday Bottled in Bond Bourbon at your local liquor store, or 360 Vodka if that's your desired taste. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. As I just said a minute ago, I'm a huge fan of your work, and I remember personally, actually, when I started to transition from the old school stats of referencing points per drive or points per game, to transitioning to referencing points per drive. It was actually around 2016. I exchanged some messages with you, and you were so grateful to actually help me understand some of your data and how it works. And since then, bcftoys.com has been a go-to resource for me, along with Bill Connolly, Kelly Ford. You guys are all terrific. And I want to tease this out real quick before we dive in, and I kick it over to you, Brian. But for our listeners who are really probably going to be really interested in this, I was reviewing your FEI ratings the other night, again, dating back to the 2021 season. I tweeted this earlier this week, too. Over the last 3 seasons, K-State is one of 5 teams in college football to finish in your top 15 nationally in FEI. The only other 4 programs that have done so over that 3-year span are Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, and Alabama. And those 4 programs, as many know, have made up 8 of the 12 participants in the college football playoff over the last 3 seasons, and include the national champion in each of those seasons. So really impressive for K-State to be associated with that. And we'll get into your numbers and like why K-State is number 12 in your new 2024 FEI preseason projections. But for those who aren't as familiar with your work, could you maybe give some background on how you got started doing this and how you developed some of your ratings, your system for ranking and evaluating teams?
Sure thing, Cole. Thanks for having me. It's always fun to sort of shake off the dust of the offseason and get talking about college football again. I started work with my college football, my ratings work, over 20 years ago. I was kicking around numbers with friends and family, primarily trying to settle arguments with my brothers over how bad or good our favorite team, Notre Dame, was playing on any given day. And I started researching some data on my own because I was frankly looking for answers to questions that the box score was insufficient in 2003 to answer, and started collecting the core data, which is drive data, every possession in every game, most of which, 96% of them, are an offense versus a defense. But I count things like a special teams return as a possession in some of my data set. But basically, that's the core data that I collect, and I've been doing it for nearly 20 years on the collection side. I started with collecting some of the wrong data initially, which is why my ratings on my site only go back to 2007. But the infancy of it was way back in 2002, 2003. I publish what's called the FEI ratings, Fremeau Efficiency Index, which are basically just opponent-adjusted possession efficiency. When you have the ball, are you moving the ball into scoring range and capitalizing, and when you don't have the ball, you're stopping the opponent from doing it. And that's really what the overall ratings boil down to, as a way to measure the best teams in the country at this efficiency statistic. Generally, that efficiency statistic lines up with success on a championship path, but not always. My numbers don't necessarily say the number one team in the country is in the efficiency data is definitely the number one team in the country hoisting the trophy at the end of the year. But for the most part, they line up with those kind of end of year results.
What's your weekend look like during college football season, Brian? Have you established some sort of automated formula that calculates this stuff, or are you having to plug and play data from every college football game?
I'm a little bit old school on that front. My day job's actually with campus operations here at South Bend, Indiana, so I actually spend most of the game not watching the games. I'm actually one of those nerds. You can rightfully say, you can criticize me for that. I do spend my Sundays usually doing the data collection, and there's a few sources out there, very generous people who scrape data and post some of the data. But I do kind of a little extra legwork, both to pull the drive data, starting with some sites like collegefootballdata.com is a great one for some initial pass at that. But I also go to the team sites themselves. What I found is if I'm looking for the most accurate version of what happened in the game, believe it or not, the UMass website's drive summary is going to represent that better than maybe even an ESPN play-by-play summary will, because as I've come to understand it, the statistician who's working the press box on site on a given game day is the best and the most official record of what happened. So I do a little bit of, a few hours of parsing data. I mean, because I'm only collecting drives and possessions, it's a hefty amount of information. It's 24 possessions on average per game, and there's 40 to 60 FBS versus FBS games every weekend. And it adds up. Certainly over time, I've got 250,000 drives in an iceberg spreadsheet that I can refer to, and that's what kind of my published work is driven off of. But it's a few hours of investment on a Sunday. I usually post my updated ratings by Tuesday of the following week after I do some of the back of house data cleaning and calculations. And I, in addition to posting efficiency data of what happened, I post game projections of what we expect will happen, and I post the results of all that as well. So if you're skeptical about the success, I wouldn't take every one of my game projections to Vegas and bet on it. Certainly, I do think they're calibrated to what I would expect the results to be. So I go in and say, I think I've got 45 games projected for a weekend, and based on the projected likelihood of upsets, I'm only going to get 33 of them right. And if the system is tuned where I come back with 32 or 33 or 34 of them correct, then I think it's a good system. It isn't necessarily, again, a bankable one because those are sort of numbers of winners and losers. But I do also, post the records against the spread, again, as a calibration tool, less than a bettor's edge tool. But it's been fun to see what different audiences latch onto what. I started doing this with a fan's eye in mind to better understand the game, and I think that's still maybe the best value I might provide. But I have heard from everyone from a special teams coach who's interested in digging in on what I am and am not measuring with regard to like a punt statistic, all the way to someone looking for an edge with finding what my numbers might be seeing that the market isn't seeing, and everything in between. So it's been fun to build that audience somewhat organically over time. And I do post things free because it sort of frees me up from the commitments of meeting an official deadline, and two, it's about the level of a time I can put into it is I think it's my gift back to share as much of my data I'm receiving from others that I can turn back into others receiving it from me.
Before we head to break, got to tell you, as always, about our friends over at homefieldapparel.com. Get on over to Homefield and check out all the 50-plus items they've got on their website. K-State gear, they got numerous hats. You've seen me rocking some Homefield hats on the 3 Mile Pod. I don't have one on today, but I've got a couple sitting right by me right here, side by side. You got a couple of these, what what do they call them? Fur Willy, the Furry Willy. I can't remember the exact name for it, but I love the look of the hats. I've got 4 home field hats. I've got about 10 to 15 home field shirts and hoodies in my closet, from lavender, retro, cool, sleek design. Some of the most comfortable shirts that I own are home field shirts, including the new white Big 8 championship shirt from 1977 for the Big 8 championship 1977 season that I recently got from home field as well. It's maybe the most comfortable, soft t-shirt that I have in my closet. Love it. Encourage everybody to get on over to homefieldapparel.com. They do great things for colleges across the country, over 100 schools to choose from, as you've seen from DY rocking all the home field gear, but would especially encourage you to check out all the K-State items they've got on their site, 50 plus items, and we've got you covered with 15% off. Enter discount code 3MAW24. Again, that's 3MAW24 when you go to checkout, and you will score 15% off your entire order. Go support homefieldapparel.com as they support us on 3MAW.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest-ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
Well, it's tremendous stuff, Brian, and you outlined a lot of different things there. And I'm curious because I'm a huge fan of points per drive, net points per drive, the differential between offensive and defensive points per drive that a team allows. And I think that's a great criteria for evaluating a team. But I'm curious for your perspective, out of all the stats and criteria you have for evaluating a team, is there maybe one or two of them that you view as the best identifier of how good a team is or their quality level?
It's a good question, because if I answer it with the most technical response, I might point to which ones correlate best with winning percentage at the end of the year. And frankly, just points scored and points allowed might get you there and doesn't tell you a whole lot of depth of an answer. But it's obviously that's a data point that you could say correlates highly with it. What is a predictive statistic or a reliable one that is repeatable? I do find there's sort of 4 key efficiency stats that are all around in the same ballpark of reliability in terms of if they're this good coming into the game, they're probably going to be about this good coming out of the game. And those are points per drive first and foremost. And honestly, I don't know that I discovered a hidden truth, because at the end of the day, it's really just pace adjusted, points scored and allowed. But it's because I do some work to take out garbage time, because I do some work to make sure that I'm zeroing in on that actual pace adjustment. I think it's more certainly than data you can just pull out of a box score. I track something called available yards percentage. I stole that statistic from an old friend about 15 years ago who suggested it, and I've been using it ever since. But the best way to describe it is if your drive starts on your own 40-yard line, you have 60 available yards in front of you to the end zone. What percentage of those did you get? And you add up all those available and actual yards to arrive at an efficiency number about really how well you move the ball. It's not about how often you get into the end zone, which shows up on the scoreboard, but really, do you occupy the field, not time of possession, but the kind of field of possession. And so I really like that number. I use yards per play. I calculated it a little bit differently because I'm not collecting or zeroing in on play level data. I'm using sort of drive yards. So it could be inclusive of a penalty, and I'm counting that as yards achieved or yards lost if you're losing that. And divided by plays, because that speaks a bit to explosiveness. What I've found is that yards per play is among the efficiency numbers, the least reliable one, and that sort of surprised me, or at least repeatable one. For all I know, it has something to do, and I haven't done this level of research, but the variability in what defenses key off of. Some are probably more than happy to allow a team some big plays because they're aggressively game planning to kind of give up big yards per play, but still kind of control the game in another way. And another team might say, no, our whole game plan is built off of kind of limiting the big play, but we're going to allow kind of a consistent thing. So I think there's some variable play in yards per play. And then a relatively new one, at least on my site that I've published this year, is simply called possession efficiency, and it's what I would describe it in layman's term is it's even more refined points per drive. The idea that a points per drive metric doesn't care where you started the drive. You might have started a drive on the opponent's 10 or your own 10. It's going to calculate how many points you scored on that one drive. The possession efficiency is sort of tipping the scales to the one on the opponent's 10-yard line is supposed to score, and the one on your own 10 is not supposed to score. And it's basically adding a little bit of a nuance to it. But those four metrics are the ones that I guess I trust most, and the FEI ratings, which are the opponent adjusted version of that possession efficiency metric, are the ones that I think have proven to me to be the most reliable over time.
Well, I like the possession efficiency you just outlined, because actually before he came on the show, Brian, I was earlier today, we did an offensive preview show on KCSN, and we're talking about the K-State offense and obviously citing that K-State averaged 3.03 points per drive per your data, which ranked 11th best in the country last year. And then I started to wonder, I was like, well, it felt like K-State had a lot of drives that were short fields too. And so, I was looking at that because teams turned the ball over. K-State started a couple drives on like the opponent's 2-yard line and only had to get it 2 yards, and they get, the 7 points per drive for that. And so that possession efficiency, the field position data that you have on your site as well is all super helpful. And then you also, Ryan, got the F+ ratings, which is kind of a merger of you and Bill Connolly's SP+ at ESPN. Do you want to speak to that a little bit? I know you just launched your F+ ratings, which is what led to me reaching out to you as a nice reminder that I wanted to get you on the show. You released them this week, and a lot of folks were excited to see your F+ rating. So maybe you could just at a high level tell us about those.
Yeah, so the origins of F+ are back to the days when Bill and I met through Football Outsiders. We both were writing back in the late 2000s. I want to say 2007 is when maybe we first intersected on that site. And Aaron Schatz, who ran Football Outsiders for many years with the NFL data, really just invited both Bill and I to say, hey, can you combine forces to make a super metric rather than just posting FEI and SP+, Bill's numbers, on our site? And this might be surprising, but we literally just mashed up the numbers. I mean, it's effectively an average of the two systems. Now, we use different scales, so there's a little bit of more nuanced math behind it. But at the end of the day, it's saying, hey, Bill thinks the teams are this good, and Brian's system thinks the teams are this good. What's the happy medium between the two? And what we found over the years, and why we've maintained it, originally, again, at Football Outsiders, but when that site folded a couple years back, I just moved all that data to my site with Bill's blessing. People who follow both of us, I think, really value this this combined metric, partly because, and I think we both believe this too, we trust our own numbers, but we also know our numbers aren't seeing everything. And because we're approaching the evaluation of teams through two different lenses, him first and foremost through play-by-play based data, me primarily through drive-based data, it's very possible that we agree on 80% of the teams pretty closely, and 10% of them I'm much higher on than his, and 10% I'm much lower on than his. And F+ is a way to smooth out the edges. And so if you believe in the numbers that go into both of our systems independently, the kind of combination ratings that F+ provides is it's sort of an easier pill to swallow sometimes than a number that says, well, that doesn't make sense to me and I don't know why. F+ sometimes kind of makes those edge cases disappear, which is, again, it's at the end of the day just an average of two systems, but like some other folks who publish combination ratings, Ken Massey has a Massey consensus that has like 100+ systems in it. There's a few other people who have been doing. Kelly Ford, I think, has done some work with a couple of combination ratings. I think there's some value in especially when the computers disagree, that seeing where they find agreement and kind of smoothing out the outliers or eliminating the outliers helps built some trust in the end result. So that's why we keep running it. People definitely like it.
Yeah, I love it. I think the F Plus is one of the best tools that you can find as far as advanced metrics, because it takes you and Bill, again, like I said, kind of the original greats, as this is Kelly Ford always likes to say as well, who's been on the show several times with us, and merges your guys' data together. I think it's a great checks and balances system, and I love looking at the F Plus. K-State, by the way, now number 13 in the 2024 F Plus projections, which is number 1 in the Big 12, ahead of Utah, which is number 16, and we can get into the Big 12 in just a moment, Brian, but let's dive into K-State a bit here. And this brings us to our top storyline of the show, brought to our friends at Elenco, top home improvement company, premier home improvement company that can cover all your needs, from windows replacement to siding to bathroom remodels in the KC area that covers Western Missouri and Northeast Kansas. Elenco will have you covered, and owned by terrific K-Staters. So go support them as they support us on Threema. But I mentioned earlier that K-State is one of 5 programs in the country to finish top 15 in your FEI over the last 3 seasons. And if you look at the F Plus, I mentioned they're number 9, or excuse me, they're one of 9 teams in the F Plus to be in the top 15 since 2022. So in 2022, they were top 15, 2023, top 15. And in your projections this year, they're 13th in the F Plus. They joined Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Oregon, Texas, Penn State, and LSU on that list. And the average fan might think, well, K-State's 27-13 over the last 3 years on that, and they might wonder, like, does K-State belong in that company? And I'm curious for your perspective on the data. What is it about K-State and what they've done that the metrics like so much?
At least in my case, Kansas State has been one of the more reliably efficient teams, and that is showing up in that stat you just rattled off. The projections to start the year, in my case, are exclusively based on priors. Like there's no kind of magic special sauce where I'm like putting my thumb on the scale for this or that. I'm basically saying how good were you last year? How good were you over the previous several years? Because I've found that is a reliable starting point. That isn't going to nail every team by all means. I guarantee I'm going to whiff big on some number of the 134 FBS teams, but by leaning on that recent history, there's a reliability for both just a starting point and it really places kind of like a program expectation. Your program is this healthy because of its recent success. That probably does play into things like your success in drawing recruits, or your success in drawing transfers, or riding a wave of losses at a key position, because your proven success is actually the more reliable marker than those variables, is what I've discovered. So yeah, what's driving that success? When I think about efficiency, you mentioned it earlier with putting yourself in enviable field position because you play solid defense that's turning the opponent over, or you have a strong enough special teams unit where you're on the right side of good field position more often than you're on the wrong side of it. That's a function of it. Teams that can control the ball, again, not necessarily the clock. I don't care about time of possession, but controlling the back and forth of a game, it shows up in the field position and the efficiency metrics that I'm tracking. And again, Kansas State's been built that way to beat teams that way. It feels like for a long time. I know the more recent success with and some of the more recent coaching changes than a 20-year history is certainly more relevant to that question. But again, efficiency is everything to me. The drive is everything. You only get the ball 12 times a game sometimes, and if you're a team that can control the possessions the way you want to, you might be deliberately trying to limit your opponent to only 10 possessions and kind of reducing that frequency. So your ability to not go 3 and out is going to show up in the data. Your ability to push yourself out of poor field position, because one of the killers of a 3 and out that really shows up in the data is if you do that deep in your own territory, because your opponent is certainly going to have plus very positive field position, not necessarily on the plus side of the field, but you're going to have a short field to contend with on defense. And so teams that, again, can work themselves out of bad field position, even in a non-scoring drive, are going to end up showing up in my data. And I do think Kansas State's one of the kinds of programs that has had more reliable success doing that, or especially over the last couple of years, than the whole. You've seen some flashes in the pan that maybe have a great one-year outing but then fall back, or even a couple of years but then can't sustain that. I do think Kansas State, thinking about the category of teams that you included them in, having more elite success is also one of the things that I'm always opens my eyes. There are teams and programs that I don't know if I'd call it a ceiling, but they've sort of found their level in a 10 to 15 range, or even a 7 to 15 range. And there's I would include, Notre Dame sometimes shows up in that category for me. Like, as a fan, I might feel that program is set up for a level of success that I can feel good about, and yet there's a ceiling that of a height that hasn't been reached. That it's okay. When are we going to break through to that next iteration? So a number 13 rating or a number 11 rating to start the year, depending on which metric you're looking at, is a great starting point and feels like a contender. And yet it might still feel a mile away from being number 3 or number 2. And that is the gap that I think is actually hardest to close. So the Georgias of the world, the Ohio States of the world, and the Alabamas of the world have dominated that top 3-4 position. Michigan worked their way into there, not just because of last year's success, but heading into last year, they showed up in that kind of top 5 zone. And that's, I think, the level of performance and efficiency and dominance that sort of needs to be proven before you can truly be called a championship contender. Now, with the playoff this year, a lot of teams are going to be in the mix, but are they going to really be knocking on the door of the Final Four? I'm not sure about that, and I'm really kind of looking forward to seeing what happens when we get to that stage, because maybe all my priors are going to be have to change. But right now, I'm thinking there's really a still small collection of true championship contenders. There's just going to be a lot more people we're talking about who are playing meaningful games.
It's tremendous stuff, Brian. And as a reminder, folks, go check out alencohome.com. Again, that's ALENCO home.com, or give Sam a call. You've heard us shout out his number before numerous times on the show. Go check it out. Give Sam a call, a great K-Stater as well, or go to alencohome.com. They've got you covered with free estimates to go check out for your home improvement needs. Got you covered. Door replacements, windows, siding, bathroom remodels. Great company based out of Kansas City that is owned by terrific K-Staters. Go support them as they support us on 3Mo. I'm also curious, Brian, what about one-score games? Like, how much do you track that? How influential is that? There's a lot of, I was looking at Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy, and I think I looked at him. Obviously, Oklahoma State's had a lot of success, kind of similar to K-State in the mold that they've maybe overachieved a little bit during the Mike Gundy era. And I look back to, I think, 2013 as a data point, and I think Gundy, I had him in FBS games only 33-15 in one-score games, eliminating, I didn't count the pandemic season just because things were so out of whack there. Chris Kleiman, 8-11 in one-score games. You look at TCU in the championship season when they got to the national championship game, I think they were 6-1 in one-score games. K-State, that won the Big 12 title that year, was 3-2, and then last year K-State goes 1-4 in one-score games, and as a result is 9-4 overall. And I'm just wondering, I think Kelly Ford, he has his what-if rankings, right? Where, if the score was reversed in a one-score game, he had K-State as the number 1 team in the country. And so I wonder how your model maybe tracks to that as well, and how much you keep tabs on it, because there's a lot of those coin flip type endings that are really close games that I imagine influence the metrics as well.
I don't track it as a separate metric, but although once upon a time, I think I did have a page on my site that was, performance in one-score games or two-score games even, et cetera, because I do think with enough data points, the numbers are likely to even out in that. I don't buy that that at the end of the day there are some coaches or programs that have a magic wand and to be way on one side of 500 in one-score games. But I also think there just aren't enough data points to know. So if Gundy is whatever it was, 33-16, if he actually played 150 games, would it be more like 80-70? Like, I would bet on that. I wouldn't bet on, he's going to maintain the 33 and he's going to win 2/3 of them, because I don't think the math works that way. But the limited number of games and the kind of sample size and streakiness of random outcomes, I put quotes around that because I don't think every one-score game is a totally random outcome, but I do think there is definitely some randomness in every game, and the idea that it could have bounced a different way or one event could have sprung a different outcome is very possible. Washington last year rode a one-score game streak. I think it was like 10 games at one point. they were winning, and they rode it all the way to a rightful place in the college football playoff championship game. Were my numbers high on Washington all year? No, in part because of that. They were not dominating the way Michigan was dominating. So could they have been in position to win the championship had they played against Michigan like they did against Texas or Oregon on their previous two games? Yes. Did the close calls catch up to them? I don't know if that's true. Michigan won the game, but there's a little bit of, with enough data points, I do think living on the edge doesn't work. I don't know if that fully answers the question you're going at, but I do think that there's something to be said for a regression to the mean. I wouldn't just simply say, though, that a team that, we got Washington as an example, they were this way one year, they're going to slide back the opposite way. I know some regression is likely, but I do think over time that stuff kind of sorts itself out and evens out. And the coaches that are going to end their careers as legends kind of caught the right lightning in the bottle off of the right stretch of their career to not have to have 1,000 one-score games. They got only 50 of them, and they ended up winning 2/3 of them.
I think that all makes sense, Brian. I mean, when I was going through the Big 12 coaches, Neil Brown, who going into last year at West Virginia was on the hot seat, he's now 13-8 in one-score games. But this is a guy that was on the hot seat just a little while ago. Joey McGuire at Texas Tech, 7-3 during his time at Tech so far in one-score games. And yet Chris Kleiman, who's viewed as one of the better coaches, especially in the Big 12, but also maybe one of the underrated coaches in the country, 8-11 in one-score games. So, yeah, it feels a little bit more fluky to your point about the regression to the mean. And I think you kind of maybe answered my question earlier on this, but I was curious, like, with conference realignment, all the changes that we've seen, and then also the transfer portal and guys returning production, et cetera, like, do you include any of that in your data?
So in my FEI projections, I don't. And I got on, if you go to my site and you look those up and you're wondering, boy, you really think Washington's not going to fall further back? They lost all their whole team. It's good that this is the reason why they're showing up as recent success, and recent success only is driving what their projected rating is. I got a little bit of a page on my site that talks a little bit about the why of that. The research behind it for me is it isn't as if those transitions don't matter, but I highly, highly, and heavily prioritize the recent success because the numbers show to me that I'm going to get more teams right by doing it this way than by trying to adjust every team, some of which will be right and some of which will be wrong. My colleagues like Bill are definitely using as many transition factors as they can factor in, and that's another reason why I think the F+ ratings are probably going to see some differences get smoothed out. My numbers are going to be higher on some teams because of that not including those transition factors and others. And I also will say again, I'm a hobbyist at this, not a full timer. There's a time limit to how much I get to pay attention to the transfer portal, and I get to pay attention to roster changes, et cetera, that have sort of defaulted to, well, can I trust some baseline numbers and be upfront about what my numbers are saying and what they aren't saying? And if people like that, I'm going to stick with it. And that's sort of been the case for me too. So are there glaring omissions? Probably. Going to last year, I was way low on Colorado, probably lower than anyone else. And when they shot out of the gate, I was starting to scratch my head and wondering, well, this is a good example of me missing the boat. Now, when they finished 4-8, they definitely finished higher than where I projected. But did I feel a little bit of satisfaction that, you know what, my cautiousness probably made myself a little bit more accurate about Colorado's midseason performance than someone who might have started them really high, reacted to a strong start and thought they were a top 20 team. My numbers never thought they were a top 60 team. And for that reason, there's some value in kind of that recent success doesn't turn around overnight, at least not for many teams. So yes, there can be bounce backs. There can be yo-yoing, but I really like the approach I've taken, at least as a starting point. And again, those preseason numbers get filtered out as the season progresses, and you start to see by week 4 there aren't any glaring what's going on with this team. Are they being dragged down or up because of that preseason number? Really, the incoming data kind of takes care of itself in the early part of the year as well.
I think you're vindicated on Colorado, Brian, by staying the course with how you projected them last year. Everybody got on the hype train, it felt like, and I'm glad you didn't, because I was right there along with you. Anyways, just one more quick question, and I'll let you go, Brian. And this is really just a transition to the Big 12 outlook overall and maybe all the Power 4 conferences, which is still weird to say. I mean, Brian, I was looking through your FEI ratings and talking about conference realignment. I was writing down which teams are in the top 40, and I kept missing teams from their conference affiliation because I can't keep track of where anybody's at anymore. It's so weird to think USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington are Big 10 teams. I even forgot, and this has been a while, that Maryland is in the Big 10. It just all feels out of whack to me. But talking about the Big 12, K-State 13 and the FEI, Utah's number 16. You got Iowa State 23rd, Oklahoma State 26 nationally, Arizona 27, TCU 28. I'm not going to rattle all 16 off. Don't worry. Tech 34, UCF 38, West Virginia 39, KU at 47, which was interesting to me. I look at the FBI, I look at the top 40 teams. You have 12 SEC teams ranked in the top 40 nationally. No surprise. I think most people would. 10 Big 10 teams in the top 40. 9 Big 12 teams in the top 40, and then 6 ACC teams. Obviously, the Big 10 and SEC have the higher end rankings. Big 10 has 4 of the top 10 teams in the country, SEC 5 of the top 10. But maybe how would you assess the Big 12 going into this year, the first year of the new look Big 12, and maybe how would your metrics or model, or maybe it's not even based off that, maybe it's your opinion if you want, how would you maybe order the tier of toughest conferences to least toughest out of the Power 4 leagues as we head into 2024 after all the changes?
Yeah, I'm also confusing myself whenever I look at a schedule to say, wait, who are they playing this year? And wait a second, are all of these conference games or some of these conference opponents actually non-conference games because they were scheduled beforehand? It's going to be dizzying, I think, throughout the year. If I think about conference strength, I hesitate to default to this one's the best because everything is nuanced. I might make an argument to you or right now that says, well, obviously the SEC is the best because I've got Georgia number 1, and based on my projections, that's going to be the most highly competitive top tier conference. And then I could also say, but the Big 12 is going to be the most competitive and probably has the highest floor among its, middle tier, and therefore it is the best. And then I might say, oh, but there's great balance in this. In other words, you could make and craft a best, toughest, trickiest gauntlet, easiest road, probably any way you want among the Power 4. Certainly, you could try to among the Power 4. I do think that there is a separation that we're going to see with the Power 2, and it kind of pains me that that is happening to our beloved sport, but I can also understand the dynamics that got us here and what that also might lead to. One of the things I'm really curious about, because I don't know until the numbers tell me, is how my system is going to handle some of these new alliances. I have a page on my site where I talk about the 2020 bad data problem. All of my rankings kind of were broken in 2020, and they're all posted there. I've got, I think, Buffalo and Ball State in the top 10, and I've got BYU number 2. And I don't say that as, therefore, the system's crap, because there's no way those teams were very good. It's that my numbers rely on the kind of interconnectivity of the sport. I need non-conference games to know that, relatively speaking, the SEC is better than the MAC. Now, we all know the SEC is better than the MAC. We can open our eyes, watch a game, see the players side by side, and know one is better than the other. But the computer doesn't know that until there's a connection of teams, whether they play directly, whether they have common opponents or not. And in 2020, the bad data problem was none of the power conferences played any other power conference or any other non-conference games until the bowl season. And even then, they basically only played a couple of each other, and they never really played the non-Power 5. So my numbers are telling me, well, there is nothing to tell me there's a difference between Alabama and Buffalo because there was no network that connected the two, and therefore Buffalo's performance against its circle of teams and Alabama's performance against its circle of teams were more similar. And so I'm wondering, this is a long way of saying, I'm wondering if the future state we are heading into starting this year is going to sort of impact the network in unexpected ways. Are we going to see a tougher SEC in conference than we had historically, which might reduce the raw efficiency numbers of some SEC teams, but at the same time, a tougher SEC that plays outstanding out of conference might elevate the conference as a whole in an unexpected way. And honestly, until the season plays out, I'm not going to really know whether the reliability of FEI year over year or F plus year over year, if I'm going to have to tweak my perspective on it, that 2023 and past data meant one thing, and 2024 and beyond data is going to mean something else. And again, as a curious fan, as a data analyst, I'm interested in it and kind of excited to see what the numbers spit out. As a college football purist, I don't love that we're in this experiment, and rather than doing the kind of traditional things that I grew up with in the 80s and 90s. But again, it's an evolving sport, and I'm certainly on board with it. But that's a very long-winded answer to the question. But there's a lot to come that I'm kind of both excited and a little nervous about, frankly.
Well, same. As a K-State fan, a fan in Big 12 territory, Brian, I can tell you we're always a little on edge with realignment and where things are going as well, and just hope that we have a seat at the table in Big 12 country down the road. Well, Brian, hey, I loved having this chat and conversation with you. Love getting the chance to actually see you in person. Well, not in person. We're virtual here like everything. But it was really fun to chat, get your perspective, really admire your work, like I said, and encourage everybody who's a college football fan that loves the numbers, that likes to dive in, to view some of Brian's data over at bcftoys.com. Brian, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate you.
You got it, Cole. Thanks.
Thank you.